Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Nadia Massi. Here's what's coming up in the programme. 300 schoolboys kidnapped in Nigeria have been released. This is according to the governor of Katsina state. We'll get the latest from our correspondent in Lagos very shortly. And Tunisia, 10 years on from the revolution, will explore the economic and social legacy of the first Arab Spring. We start tonight's show then with some news from Nigeria. The governor of Katsina state has announced that over 300 schoolboys who were kidnapped last week are now in government hands. The governor, Aminu Bello Masari, told state television a short while ago that 344 children who had been held in the neighbouring state of Zamfara have been freed. He added, though, that not all of the children are currently out of captivity. Now, it was the Islamist group Boko Haram that said that it had kidnapped those children. Those that we understand have been freed today are, we understand, in the hands of government security personnel heading back at the moment to Katsina. Well, for the latest, let's cross now to Lagos. Let's talk to our correspondent there, Sam Olukoya. First of all, what can you tell us about these reports that the children have been freed?
Well, for now, the information is still very, very scanty. But what is clear is that at the official level, it's been announced that these boys, as they put it, have been released. So that will suggest that the children are in the custody of the government. Some government officials were saying that the children are on their way back to Katsina from the bush. That is what we are hearing for now. So I think shortly we'll be able to have full details about what exactly happened, under what circumstance were these children released.
Yeah, so this is news that's coming into us really very recently, but remind our viewers what it is that's happened in the last few days and who it is that we understand is responsible.
Well, events have happened rather fast in the last few days. First, there was the attack on this school, and more than 300 children were missing. And some days later, leader of the Boko Haram sect, Abubakar Shekau, came on an audio message saying that he was responsible for the abduction of these children. He said the idea was to stop children from going to school. And earlier today, we saw a video of a number of children in a place that looks like a bush, and these children were calling for their rescue. They specifically said the soldiers should not come there. The Air Force flights over there should stop. But at the same time, they were begging for their rescue. I mean, from what I've known in the past, that when you have videos like this where people say they should rescue them, and at the same time, they are saying that they shouldn't use military might. What that sometimes suggests is that a deal should be made with whoever has abducted them. So I will not be surprised that some deals have been made. I'm not sure whoever held these boys would release them for the fun of it. Definitely, there's a good chance some deals have been made to facilitate the release of these children. And the government might find this necessary, given the pressure it's been facing, given the political pressure, given the bad publicity it's had in the country. It might have felt that it would be nice to go into a deal with whoever is holding these boys to put an end to this very sad situation.
All right, Sam Olukoya, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to speed for what we do know this hour, that on the news, that some of the children kidnapped, allegedly by Boko Haram in Nigeria, have been released. More information on that when we get it. Now, it was exactly 10 years ago today that a Tunisian seller of fruit, Mohamed Bou Azizi, frustrated by poverty and corruption, set himself alight, this in the city of Sidi Bouzid. Now, that desperate act was the spark that lit the Arab Spring, the start of a mass movement that eventually toppled autocratic leaders, not just in Tunisia, but in Libya and Egypt, and triggered Syria's civil war as well. So Today, we have a special edition of Eye on Africa, and we'll be devoting the rest of our programme to the momentous fallout from Bouazizi's actions. Let's start our coverage then with this report by Claire Rush, who takes us back to the events of December 2010 in Tunisia.
This is where the Arab Spring was born. On December 17th, 2010, in the Tunisian city of Sidi Bouzid, Mohamed Bouazizi lit himself on fire after police confiscated his fruit cart. An act of desperation and defiance that sparked nationwide protests against President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali and his 23-year rule, as demonstrators rallied against corruption, unemployment, and inequality. The movement, led largely by the youth, ultimately toppled Ben Ali. On January 14, 2011, he fled to Saudi Arabia. The uprising had become a revolution.
Transitioning from a dictatorship to a democracy is difficult. At least people won't have been killed or injured for nothing.
10 months later, the country's first free elections since its founding in 1956 were won by the moderate Islamist party Ennahda. But political deadlock and the assassinations of two opposition leaders forced the party to step down in 2014, handing power over to secular opposition groups, just as lawmakers overwhelmingly approved a new constitution recognizing democratic freedoms. Later that year, Beji Caid Essebsi became Tunisia's first democratically elected president, ruling until his death in 2019. The secular leader is remembered by many for guiding the country to democracy. 10 years after its Jasmine Revolution, however, Tunisia remains gripped by political deadlock. For many, their initial hope has turned into disillusion.
The slogan, employment, freedom, dignity, is just a slogan, nothing more. It's what we called for during the revolution, but nothing came of it.
Tunisia's long-running economic crisis has been exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic, further crippling the crucial tourism industry, which had already been suffering following a spate of terror attacks. The IMF predicts that the country's economy will contract by 7% this year.
All right, well, listening to that report with me was Sharangarawal. He is a fellow at the Centre of Middle East Policy at Brookings Institute. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme today, sir.
Thanks for the invitation.
Well, you just heard it then at the end of that report. Tunisia, as we know very well, is gripped now by an economic crisis. Does it seem to you that actually standards of living for most people in Tunisia have got worse since the revolution?
Yes, unfortunately, by almost every metric, the economy is even worse today than it was 10 years ago. Before the revolution, unemployment was around 13%. Today, it's at 16%. Inflation was around 3 to 4%. Today, 6 to 7%. Part of the reason is that in the early years of the transition, there were major security threats, which hurt the tourism sector. But part of it also is that as a democracy now, Tunisia is trying to please all sides, both the labor union and the business sector, and that's making it difficult to take bold action on the economy. But perhaps most importantly, there hasn't been much international help. There was never a big Marshall Plan like the US gave to Europe after World War II. There have been increases in military and security assistance, but much less by way of economic assistance.
All right, so you're very clear then, the economic problems in Tunisia are very serious indeed. There is an argument to be made, though, that perhaps while that may be getting worse, when it comes to freedom of speech, perhaps Tunisia is a little better than it was 10 years ago. Let's have a listen then to the words of the cartoonist Nadia Khiari.
A lot of taboos have been lifted. I'm not saying that the situation has improved, but we can talk. We talk about religious questions. We talk about sexual questions, homosexuals, women's bodies, power. All these things are taboo, but we talk about them. We talk about it in a bad way, of course, but we talk about it. It's a step. And I hope that in 10 years' time, it will be quite normal to talk about these topics in a much more human way.
All right, Sharangarawal, still with us, still listening to that. Do you agree with what you just heard there, that Tunisians are now freer to say what they think about religion, about sexuality, about women's rights?
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest gain of the revolution has been freedom of expression. Politically, Tunisians are free now to criticize the government without fear of being in prison. On social issues as well, Tunisians are now free to discuss even issues that were formerly taboo topics. And there also has been some progress on these issues beyond discussions. In the 2014 constitution, it enshrined not just freedom of religion, but freedom of conscience, permitting atheism. The Constitution also enshrined not just gender equality, but an active commitment from the state to achieving gender equality. And even recently, Tunisia passed an anti-racism law to combat discrimination against darker-skinned Tunisians as well as sub-Saharan migrants. So there has been important progress on a number of social issues that might otherwise have been taboo before the revolution.
All right, and it is worth saying that this was a revolution that was led in large part by young people. And what is it that they make of the direction of the country today? Well, our correspondent Lilia Blaze has travelled to what was the epicenter of the revolution at its beginning, at Sidi Bouzid, to meet a few former protesters. Here's her report.
In Sidi Bouzid, the revolutionary city, some young people like Nowris were able to launch projects after the 2011 uprising, taking advantage of entrepreneurship incentives. She opened her lingerie and pajamas boutique in 2019, selling only Tunisian brands.
This is a brand specialized in silk satins. That too. That is a brand of Nighty. We feel more free to create our own projects, not to wait for jobs in the public sector.
Other young people from the neighborhood of Hayya Noor who led the first demonstrations in December 2010 are more disillusioned. 32-year-old Wajdi rejects politics. It dashed his hopes as a revolutionary.
Since we were little, we wanted to work for our country, build a house, have a job. It seemed impossible. When the revolution happened, we were happy. We thought we would change the situation, that there'd be plans for us, but nothing was done.
Beside him, Nidal of the same generation is a psychologist. He deals with the anxieties of young people, especially as they face no employment. The youth unemployment rate is 36%.
People feel that there's precarity, that there's no stability, that they can work, bring in money today, but that tomorrow nothing is certain. We're talking about the generation that made the revolution and who are now 30 to 35 years old and who are struggling to maintain a good standard of living.
If the revolution hasn't delivered economically, it has at least secured free expression. Nabil is a young rapper with the stage name Belly. He was 16 during the revolution.
تكست كتبته وقت عباد طالب بالتشغيل وبالحريه ويشوفوا في القمع من البوليس في تونس والنظام هذاك السيستم قمعهم والكل.
Today, he wants to discuss all subjects, not just the revolution.
نجم كيما تكتب اليوم على الثوره وتغني على السيستم كذا كيما غدوه تنجم تغني على الحب.
Despite the atmosphere of disillusion, young people in Sidi Bouzid are still trying to build a better future and keep the spirit of the revolution alive.
All right, Sharangarawal, finally, before we let you go, how would you characterize in just a few words the legacy of the Tunisian revolution?
The most important legacy is that Tunisia is a democracy today. The current president, Kais Saied, was elected with over 70% of the vote last year, and there were genuine celebrations around the country when he won. No other president in the region can say they've genuinely won a truly free and fair election like Tunisia's can.
All right, Sharangarawal, I want to thank you very much indeed for joining us for our special edition of Eye on Africa. Thanks to you as well for watching France 24. Do stay with us. Much more still to come this evening.